there, and welcome to Speak Up with Laurel Libby. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Jason Snead. Jason Snead is the Executive Director of the Honest Elections Project. He previously spent a decade at the Heritage Foundation as a senior policy analyst, where he managed the development of the Heritage Election Fraud Database and became a recognized expert on election integrity, criminal justice reform, and technology policy. He holds a master's in public policy from George Mason University. Welcome, Jason. Thank you so much for coming on today to talk primarily about ranked choice voting, but to share your wealth of knowledge with us.
Well, thank you for having me. It's great to be with you.
So with that, folks may not know what the Honest Elections Project is. Can you outline what that is, talk about it, and what you do exactly with that project?
Well, the Honest Elections Project is an organization that is dedicated to fighting for every American's right to vote in free and fair elections. So we are working with lawmakers and state legislatures across the country and with folks in Congress, trying to, as we always like to say, make it easier to vote, but also harder to cheat. And our North Star is delivering an election that can inspire confidence in voters so that they continue to participate in the democratic process and they can trust the results of their elections. And we know what sort of an agenda that actually looks like in practice, which is not necessarily what you might read in the pages of the New York Times, for instance, but it's things like voter identification laws, proof of citizenship requirements, and fighting against ranked choice voting so that it's actually easy to participate as an everyday voter. So we're working actively all across the country trying to advance the ball on common sense election integrity reforms that, again, are what overwhelming majorities of the American people want, and we want to make sure that their voice is not drowned out in the political fray that we see dominating the news coverage of these issues.
Yeah, making sure that their voices are heard, making sure that their voices are heard and that policies are passed that they support, making sure that their voices are heard at the polling place. I mean, I want to hit back on that point that you made, giving people faith and trust that their voice is heard when they are voting. Because some people, frankly, are disinclined to vote because they think that their vote doesn't count, or because that they think that their voice isn't heard, and so why bother? And I think that is a hurdle we need to get out of the way so that every person who is eligible to vote, and I mean every person, whether they're ideologically aligned with me or not, every person should be that is eligible to vote should be voting, and many are not for various reasons, but including feeling like their voice doesn't count.
Well, that's 100% right. I mean, a lot of times in this debate over election policy, things get boiled down to a dichotomy. And it's a false dichotomy, but it's a dichotomy of access versus security. And you'll see a lot of people sort of distill that down into, if you're on the left, you want policies that are so-called, access oriented, and if you're on the right, you want security. And they present these as mutually exclusive. In actuality, if you look at reasons why people are persistent non-voters, for instance, the folks that you point out are eligible, they're qualified, but they choose not to vote time and time again, it usually has nothing to do with it being hard to vote, or they feel like they can't find a polling place, or whatever it might happen to be. It's that they don't trust that the system reflects the will of the voters. They don't think that their vote is going to be counted the right way, and they sit the process out. They also sometimes don't care about the politicians running in a particular election. But if you're thinking about it from an access versus security and an election administration paradigm, it is far more likely that election administration concerns are going to drive people away from the polls if they don't trust the system than that the rules make it too hard to vote. And so that's why, we're pushing for safeguards and common sense rules of the road. And when you actually look at the data, and in states that adopt these policies, they see voter turnout go up. And that tells you immediately that this false dichotomy of access versus security is really more about political messaging. And it's not what voters want to see. They want to trust the system. They want common sense rules. And then that gives them the confidence to turn out and to keep turning out. And that's what we're always trying to do, is deliver a system that encourages people to keep voting.
Encourages people to keep voting. And you mentioned one thing that I want to hit back on, because this is what we're going to be talking about for a lot of this time, is that it's not complicated, that it's not hard, and that it's not confusing to people. And I think that there's nothing more confusing to voters than ranked choice voting. And Maine is unique. I think there's only one other state that uses ranked choice voting, Alaska. And in your experience, Jason, is there any other voting policy that confuses folks as much as ranked choice voting does?
I don't think that there is, to be entirely honest with you. This idea that you're going to take a system that we all understand is one person, one vote, and you're going to
That's
junk
simple.
that. It's very simple. It's very
Yeah.
straightforward. We all learn it, right? Going
Yes.
back to our very earliest civics education. One person, one vote is the root of the American democratic experiment. And yet you get rid of that, and now you're asking people to spend more time than ever before learning about more, folks running for office in all of these races, and then going through a very complicated ballot that you in Maine, this is unfortunately your life when it comes time to voting, and you're ranking all of these candidates. Sometimes in some places, we're talking about dozens and dozens of
Yeah.
rankings that you have to go through. It makes it harder to vote. It makes it more complicated to vote, and frankly, that complexity winds up actually discouraging some people from choosing to cast ballots in the first place. So it
For
is an
sure.
extremely complicated process.
It's extremely complicated. And you don't even have to get to the dozens. Like it doesn't take dozens. It takes exactly three. Three candidates on the ballot using ranked choice voting to really confuse people. And so I get questions all the time as soon as elections are drawing near is there going to be ranked choice? Because of course in Maine, our Constitution actually doesn't allow for ranked choice voting for some races. So for state representative and state senator, you have this weird thing where ranked choice is used for our primaries, but it's not for the general, but it can be used all the time for federal elections. So even the question of who am I going to be voting for that ranked choice will be used for or not, the confusion starts there.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, what you guys are dealing with is a ballot where some elections, some races are ordinary races, and then others are ranked choice, and so you're bouncing back and forth. We even see a little bit of this in Virginia, where I live, where you only have it in some localities, not statewide, for some local races. So you get to, those particular races, and then suddenly everything is, now it's ranked choice. So you're sort of in
So
a habit of voting for one, and now you're voting for multiple.
yeah, so is that in municipalities? Like Virginia, the state hasn't passed it, but specific municipalities have passed it, or what does that look like in other states? My understanding was strictly Alaska and Maine, but are there pockets out there where they are using ranked choice voting?
Yeah, so you and Alaska are the only folks that use it for at statewide levels, but there are about 60 odd cities and municipalities across the country that have adopted ranked choice voting over the last decade or so. And in Virginia, they passed a law to allow in certain municipal elections jurisdictions to opt to use ranked choice voting, and there's only a couple. Arlington County's one, Charlottesville, Virginia is another. There just isn't a groundswell of enthusiasm for this, but there are some cities and some local governments, some county governments that have adopted this. Sometimes it's been with an explicit act from the state legislature authorizing it. Other times they're just stepping in and saying we're going to run elections using ranked choice voting. But you're right, only Maine and Alaska use it in any kind of federal or statewide race. And that's frankly a pretty astounding mark, I think, against ranked choice voting. I'm sure we'll talk about this throughout the interview, but there was this massive concerted push to try to bring ranked choice voting to 6 other states in 2024 with ballot measures, and $100 million was spent on these campaigns to try to bring them in, and they all were defeated. And you're talking about a
I remember
politically
spreading the word as
diverse.
saying, don't do it.
That's right. That's right. You
Colleagues from other states would ask, they're like, what do you think about ranked choice voting? And my absolute answer was, do not do it. You will regret it. It is not of benefit. Keep to one person, one vote.
That's right. That's right. And it seems like folks listened to you, and I'm glad they did, and learned from Maine's experience, because all of these states in 2024 voted down ranked choice voting. They said we don't want this, and we're talking, just so people understand, we're talking about states as different as Oregon and Arizona and Montana, right? So this is not
Wow.
something where this was just a bunch of conservative voters or voters on the right saying we don't want this idea. This was people in deep blue territory like Oregon rejecting this as
Yeah.
well. There's just no popular demand for ranked choice voting, and it's just not a system that people want. It unnecessarily complicates things.
Yeah, so Maine, we've had ranked choice voting now for a decade or so, or it was at least voted in on the ballot by Maine people in 2016, barely. And had there been maybe three choices in ranked choice on that ballot, I don't think we would have voted for it, but it did pass by 52% in 2016. There was an attempt to repeal it. I'm not convinced people knew what they were voting on at the time. But we continue to have ranked choice, and it confuses the heck out of people. And it did have the effect of electing Jared Golden to Congressional District 2 here in Maine in 2018 when it was first implemented. That, of course, was the first election it was used in, and we saw the effect. Can you speak? I'm sure you're well versed in that, but let's talk about that election a little bit and what that looked like. And in my view, it had the very real effect of stealing that election and putting into place someone who was not elected one person, one vote.
Yeah, that was a really telling example of just what goes on with ranked choice voting in terms of rubber meets the road political realities, right? Because ranked choice voting is sold to the electorate, and this was part of the campaign in Maine too. This is about making sure that voters have more choices, that results are going to be more, reflective of the broader community, and there's usually a vein of, kind of anti-political establishment, anti-two-party system that goes into that as well. In actuality, what it tends to do is push politics to the left. And that's why you see the loudest voices are folks on the left. All of the money pushing this is coming from, liberal mega donors and so forth. And in the race that you mentioned, you saw this actually play out. You saw a sitting congressman, a Republican, Bruce Poliquin, who got more votes in the first round than his opponents. And yet, when they began the process of redistributing the votes, right, the left always loves redistribution,
Right.
and they figured out a way to apply that in electoral politics too, then he wound up losing. And he came back and tried to win his seat again 2 years later and was defeated a second time with ranked choice voting. So you had this situation where more people voted for him, but then when they came in and they did the second round of vote counting, he was defeated. And we saw a similar thing in Alaska, too, that we can talk a little bit about as well, because that's another one of these glaring examples of just what ranked choice voting is really all about.
Yeah, I mean, it manipulates the results and changes them, frankly, because as you pointed out, Bruce Poliquin got more of the votes. And if that first round were, as it has historically been since the origins of our country, the only vote, then Bruce Poliquin would have been our representative to Congress in 2018. But because of the use of ranked choice voting and because of using folks' second choice and all of that, we have now had Jared Golden in office ever since. And so tell us a little bit about Alaska and what went on there. What can we learn from other states that are also doing it badly?
Well, Alaska had an even more convoluted system imposed on them. So they also
Oh
passed this
gosh.
at the ballot. I know it's hard to believe, but they passed this at the ballot in 2020. And if you can believe it, it narrowly passed by about half a point. That was the
Wow.
margin. And it passed riding on the coattails of an anti-dark money measure. So Alaskans thought they were voting to get dark money out of Alaska politics. Ironically enough, a massive amount of dark money was coming in to push an
Of
anti-dark money
course.
measure that was really about this, kind of ranked choice voting election system and bringing that to Alaska. So the first time that they roll this system out, you have a three-way race. It was supposed to be a four-way race, but it wound up being a three-way race. And you had 60% of the state vote for the two Republican candidates in the election, and the Democrat, Mary Peltola, wound up claiming victory and claiming a majority. It's a phony majority with ranked choice voting in most of these cases. But you had 60%
Wow.
voting for the two Republicans, and
So
a
the two
Democrat still got
Republicans split the
elected.
vote, and so then second using the second choice, the
That's right,
Democrat won.
exactly. Yeah, and the
Wow.
reason I said it was even more complicated is because they ran a system called Final Four. And the idea here is that you get rid of party primaries. So you have a single California style jungle primary that everyone running for a particular office runs in. You vote for one person in the primary, and then the top four vote getters advance to the general election.
Wow.
And that's how you can have multiple Republicans on the ballot splitting each other's
Okay.
votes, and then the Democrat can slide right on in.
Oh gosh. So question for you then. Okay, so we've got this like jungle primary and a whole bunch of people run. How many Democrats ran? Was there only one? Did they kind of self-select and then or were there
Well,
multiple?
there were some interesting quirks. There were supposed to be, as I said, there were supposed to be four folks in that race, but one of
Hmm.
them ended up dropping out and never got replaced on the ballot. So that immediately winnowed the field down to two Republicans and a Democrat.
Wow.
In total, in the primary, if memory serves, there were about 4 dozen candidates in that congressional special election that were running in the primary. 4 dozen. So you see the list, and it was extraordinary. You're trying to pick out the name of your one vote in the
Mm,
primary, and then you get the top four system, and that
wow.
is essentially what they were trying to push all over the place. They changed the system to what they call Final Five, same idea, jungle primaries, and then the top five vote getters, and that's what they were pushing in a lot of states in
Mm.
2024. And I think it just left a lot of voters scratching their head, wondering what problem is this really trying to fix.
That's kind of that type of primary is kind of the next step after what Maine has done. Maine now has open primaries, and that sounds like kind of like the next step on the progressive wish list would be for these just absolutely open jungle primaries where everybody's on the same ballot. Am I wrong on that?
No, I think that that's 100% right. I think that right now, a lot of the energy nationwide in the ranked choice voting space has evaporated. So we're seeing fewer
Mm.
campaigns for ranked choice voting. The
What
threat
else
is
can we
still
do?
there. But yes, they're looking for new
What can we
places to
try?
put their money. And we're
Yeah.
seeing, the beginnings of top two or jungle style primaries in places like Oklahoma and
Really?
Arizona. I think yes,
Oof.
I think there's going to be a
Mm.
lot of that we see in the next few cycles. The left is always looking for ways to change the process of running an
Hmm.
election in ways that are designed to build in systemic advantage. And they're very good, as
Yes.
you know, at running campaigns to persuade
Mhm.
people to their way of thinking, right? So that's how you can get a
Oh, it
measure in
sounds
Michigan.
so good.
Oh, exactly. I mean, and they're
Yeah.
so good. They're so good at it. They convinced folks in Michigan that they were voting on a ballot measure a few years back to enshrine voter ID in the state constitution. And what they were actually doing was gutting voter ID. And when I
Oh
pointed
gosh.
that out to the media, I got fact checked, not the folks running the
Wow.
campaign. So they are very good at this, and I think that they're going to play on suspicions that voters harbor for the political parties and
Hmm.
say this is why we need to move towards this jungle style system, or why we eventually 10 years from now need to move back towards ranked choice voting. People will forget that
Hmm.
we just rejected this. They're always looking for
Let
those
people
sorts of
forget.
ads. Exactly.
Give a little time. Let people forget that they've rejected ranked choice voting, except Maine and Alaska. Now, Alaska did come really close to repealing it, didn't they? Recently?
They did, and that was an extraordinary thing. There was a massive, more than $12 million campaign that was spent in 2024 to defend in Alaska, right? They were going on offense in a bunch of other states, but they were on defense in Alaska. There was a repeal effort. They spent about more than $12 million to save ranked choice voting in
Wow.
Alaska in 2024 against almost nothing. Almost nothing
Yep.
was spent. And the repeal vote failed by just 700 votes. So
Wow.
it took more than $12 million and they almost lost. So
Hmm.
this year there's another active repeal effort. It is in the
Oh,
early
good.
stages, but it's looking good. It looks like there's going to be a really solid second chance at repealing ranked choice voting in Alaska. They've got the governor, they've got the Republican Party there, all in line. And
Good.
it's looking like it's a very well organized effort. So I'm hoping personally, and this is me being a little selfish, that my work fighting ranked choice voting will give me an excuse to get up to Alaska and go visit the state a little bit. But
Yeah.
I think there's a good chance that they'll repeal it this year, which would be an extraordinary rebuke again for the pro
Yes.
RCV folks.
Well, that would be great. Listen, I have visited Alaska. Have you not been there yet?
It's on my bucket list, but I haven't been
Okay.
able to swing it yet.
I was there in 2005 to run a marathon, the Anchorage Midnight Sun Marathon, and it is beautiful. That was in June, and I highly recommend, if you can pick, go while there's daylight, go while there's more daylight than less daylight. It was beautiful in June. So if you can get there like earlier in the election cycle, that's probably, good for you to really be able to see the state and enjoy it at peak sunlight.
Yeah, I think going this time of year might not be high on my
Don't do
priority
that.
list, but I'll wait a few more. I'll wait a few more months. Of course,
Yeah, don't do that.
my family and I have spent the last couple of years going on vacation in Maine, so I'll have to
Oh,
convince my wife maybe we go to the other side of the country this time.
well, I mean, you could still come to Maine, but maybe, Alaska, that makes a nice work project and take the family along, right?
Exactly. There you go.
I don't want anybody to skimp on Maine for Alaska.
I don't think you have to worry about that.
Yeah, no, probably not. So the current state of ranked choice voting in Maine is, again, it might be a little convoluted, but basically federal races. So we're talking about Senate, or representatives to Congress. Those federal races are decided under ranked choice vote. Then, when it comes to the state side of things, our Constitution does not allow for ranked choice vote in the general elections, but it does. They've decided there's wiggle room on the primaries, so our primaries can be decided by ranked choice voting. However, this year, there is a push, a bill, LD 1666, that would expand ranked choice voting to those state races, the state representatives, state senators. And basically, it's doing it through wordsmithing, or as I like to say, a manipulation of words, a manipulation of the Constitution. That's really what it is, and then a manipulation of Maine people. To be able to use it in these elections. The Constitution is clear, but through wordsmithing, the liberal left thinks that they can finagle things so that it can be used in these state elections. Give me your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, I think that the Constitution is clear that ranked choice voting isn't permitted in those races, and that's not even a question. That's been long settled and long standing.
And can you explain why, for folks who may not be familiar with the nuts and bolts of what the Constitution says about why ranked choice voting could or could not be used? What is that reason?
Well, it's written into the text of the Constitution. I'd have to go back and refresh my memory on the particular court case that I read
Plurality
a couple of
versus
years back, but
majority,
it's
basically,
the
right?
yeah, it's the idea that you can win an election. And to get back to the Bruce Poliquin race, right? He got more votes. He should have been elected. And ranked choice voting is just a fundamentally different system that doesn't align with the actual plain text of the constitutional provisions that govern your elections for those races. So I was disappointed when I saw the bill introduced because it does seem like they're playing that game of trying to get around, as we see so often from the left, right, with things like the national popular vote. They don't want
Another
to
end run
abide
around the
by it.
Constitution, right
Exactly.
there.
They just
Yep.
play. They just play with they just play those kind of rhetorical games. And to your point, if you want to change the Constitution, there is a process to do that. That's the right way to do it. I don't want them to do that by any stretch.
I don't want
But
them to do that either. It is a higher bar, and
right.
we probably should explain that a little bit. So, as far as Maine goes, to actually pass a constitutional amendment, there are a couple of pretty high bars. The first is that the bill to amend the Constitution has to pass by a two-thirds majority in the House and the Senate and be signed into law by the governor. So right there you have, most of our bills get passed by a simple 50% plus one in the legislature, but this demands a two-thirds majority. And and then, of course, to be signed into law. And then it goes to a vote of the people. And again, you have to have 50% plus one vote of Maine people to pass it into law. And so it's a pretty high bar to pass a constitutional amendment. I believe it was our most recent, or one of our most recent, was right to food. that was a big lift. And to pass a constitutional amendment regarding our system of voting to implement ranked choice, that would be an extremely tough lift. And that's why the left is not doing it and why they're using these end runs around the Constitution instead, because they know they can't meet that bar. They cannot get an actual amendment passed.
Yeah, that's right. And it's why we see that strategy used in so many political fights these days. I mentioned, national popular vote, but you run into either federal constitutional problems or you run into state constitutional problems. And they will argue exactly what you just said, that the bar is so high, the threshold is so high, we're never going to get it done. But that's kind of the point, right? I mean,
Right.
constitutions are the political DNA of our nation and of our states. And if we're going to agree to live by the contract that those documents lay out, you're going to change that contract. It shouldn't be done where, 50% plus one vote can just rule over the other 49% of people. It needs to be done where you're actually persuading and building a consensus that this is actually foundational to the way that we run our government. And so that's why playing these sorts of games where they're pretending that the constitutional language doesn't matter, we're going to run a bill that's going to make something that's unconstitutional constitutional and not follow that process, ultimately undermines the integrity of the process. Because when you do that, what you're telling anybody that loses in future elections because of the changes, in this case, to a ranked choice voting system, well, maybe their loss wasn't actually legitimate because you guys changed the rules in an extra legal fashion, and that's going to do nothing except discourage people from participating, discourage people from running. It leads to all sorts of downstream problems when it comes to the integrity of the system.
Yeah, and I think whether it's the integrity of the system or confusion from the system, that disenfranchises voters, disenfranchises Maine voters, disenfranchises Alaska voters. This system of voting absolutely, in increasing confusion, it ensures that some folks aren't going to vote or might vote wrong and see their vote thrown out altogether. If someone votes accidentally, incorrectly, not following the rules, then their entire ballot could be thrown out. And then you have one person, zero vote.
That's right. And ranked choice voting just makes that so much more likely. In fact, we've seen examples where minority voters are more likely to have their ballots thrown out when you're using ranked choice voting. We've seen an example out in California of a school board election where the outcome was actually wrong. There was a problem. There were actually two problems in this particular race in Oakland in 2022, where hundreds of voters got confused by the ranked choice voting ballot, and they didn't vote for anybody in first place, right? So they started voting in second place, but not
Oh
first.
gosh.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation. And then the double whammy was that the machine tabulators were misprogrammed. So California law said you were supposed to just treat the second place vote as the first place vote. You're allowed essentially, one mistake. They just threw all of those votes out, and then they certified the results of the entire election. And it turned
Wow.
out that all of the results were wrong, and this one race was actually wrongly decided. So it took 4 months and a lawsuit just to seek the proper
Wow.
winner. So your point about some of
So
these
at that
rules
point, somebody's
changes
sworn in,
confusing.
aren't they?
Well, like I
Like,
said, you actually had to go to court because the race
wow.
was certified and there was no mechanism to undo that certification. So you had to go to court and you had the wrongly decided winner actually arguing that he should stay on the board. So it was a bizarre situation and it
Wow.
almost escaped detection. Ironically enough, if an outside pro RCV group hadn't come in and audited those results, it might never have even been detected. That's how
Huh.
complicated the system is.
Yeah. Um, I want to back up for a minute, and for folks who want to understand Maine system a little better, can you talk about the difference when we're talking about ranked choice vote and the ideal where we have one person, one vote? Can you talk about the difference between majority and plurality and how that it plays into ranked choice voting?
Sure. So this is actually one of the big sales pitch items that we see for ranked choice voting all the time. They'll come in and they'll say, in order to have a real democratic system, we need to have majority winners in our elections. They need to actually be selected by a majority of voters. And in almost the entire country, particularly when you're talking about federal elections, we have what we call a plurality system. That is, you can have six people running, and if somebody only gets 45% of the vote, they still win, even if they don't clear that 50% plus one vote threshold. And somehow, according to the ranked choice voting lobby, if you get less than 50% of the vote, you are either not legitimately elected or you're less legitimately elected, but it's not the democratic ideal, which is hogwash, right? I mean, there
Well,
were plenty.
you say it often enough, it becomes true, right? And they sell it very convincingly. And so that plurality, that person, the one of six that got 45%, that they're saying that's not good enough, that person who got 45% has to get 50% or more, the majority, in order for us to achieve that perfect democracy, which is just, as you say, hogwash. It's the sales pitch they make. But thankfully, it's a sales pitch that 48 other states, except for, I guess, some municipalities, have rejected, fortunately.
Well, that's right. And the other piece of this is that ranked choice voting doesn't actually deliver real majorities anyway, right?
Right.
I don't believe that you have to have a majority system. There are a great many presidents that were elected in the 20th century. Is Bill Clinton an illegitimately elected president, right? I didn't like his policies. He
Well,
didn't get over 50% of the popular vote, but he was still president. Um,
and I do believe at the last election, Jared Golden never actually reached 50%,
well,
and he's still in Congress.
Well, this gets to the games that you play
Yeah.
with ranked choice voting, claiming to deliver a majority, but it really only manufactures one artificially, and it
Hmm.
does this in a couple of different ways. So first, if you run the various rounds, right, nobody gets over 50% in the first round, then you'll eliminate a candidate, and then you'll redistribute votes so that each person who voted for the defeated candidate has their ballot shifted to their next highest pick, and you keep doing that as many times as you need to get to a majority. But along the way, as you know, you have this problem that we call ballot exhaustion, which means that
Hmm.
sometimes you only vote for one or two candidates. You don't vote for every candidate in the race. And if your candidates are defeated before an outcome is declared, well, then you have what they call an exhausted ballot.
Right.
There's no more choices for you. And you can't actually leave those ballots in the denominator of the voting equation, total votes cast, because if you do, you never get to a majority in some
Hmm.
cases, right? So many exhausted ballots tally up that you'll never actually cross the 50% threshold. So they
Right.
eliminate those ballots. It's as if you didn't vote at all. So they're playing these mathematical
So again,
games.
one person, zero vote.
Exactly,
One person,
exactly.
zero vote.
And honestly, if you're trying to tell me, even if you never eliminate, all of those exhausted ballots, even if you leave them in, if you're trying to tell me that, a first place vote is the same as a fourth place vote, then I'm going to be scratching my head saying, well, what do you mean? I obviously liked the first and the second and the third place person that I voted for better than the fourth place. But ranked choice voting treats all
Hmm.
of these selections identically.
Hmm.
And so they're hoovering up all of these votes and they're saying, well, this person won with a whole bunch of second and third place votes. And that means as much as if they had won those votes in first. And I just think that doesn't pass the smell test to most people who are going to say, absolutely, a first place vote means something very different than a last place vote.
100%. I mean, and some of these folks are just going like, well, I guess I have to rank everybody. So even if I don't like so and so, that fourth place, the fourth candidate, I've got to rank them, and are convinced that that is true, and they have to. Of course, here in Maine, voters ask, how do I vote? And so, there have been various answers given out to folks. You can truly rank. You can rank all of the candidates. You can vote all the way across and vote for the same person in every ranking. That's that exhausted ballot you're talking about. Or you can vote for one person and not rank at all. You just vote for your first choice person. Frankly, that's what I do. And I know that if my ballot, if we have a ranked choice decision, my ballot is going to be, as I understand it, one of those exhausted ballots that is really not going to count, perhaps, at the end of the day, which is very frustrating.
That's right. And when you have these debates with people on the other side of the ranked choice voting issue, they'll say, well, that's really no different than the current system. You vote for one person, your candidate loses, but your vote is still counted. Ranked choice voting essentially pretends that you never showed up. And in some, examples that we've actually seen over the last few years, there are more ballots that are exhausted and eliminated than are left to be counted by the time you get to the final round. There are a lot of local races that will go 8, 9, 10 rounds of elimination before they actually get to a winner. And at that point, you're pulling in second, third, fourth place votes. It just is not a system that solves any problem that people actually think needs solving. And it introduces all of these other questions. Now you are a senior citizen in a nursing home, and maybe you need some assistance filling out your ballot, and you unfurl the scroll that you get of a ranked choice voting ballot, and you have to go through and you have to figure out who all of these people are, what they're standing for,
Right,
what their
because you're
issues
already
are, and then
maybe
rank them.
Googling. I mean, I am sure I am not the only person who has stood in the polling booth Googling who a candidate is, right? I will own that. I have done that. And I have talked to many people who say the same. I'll get texts from people. They'll literally be, early voting at the town hall. And they'll be like, hey, Laurel, who's so-and-so? I'm voting right now. Can you help me out? So not only do you have to figure out who people are, you then have to figure out who people are and then rank them right then and there on the spot. It is just adding in these layers of complication.
Yeah, there was actually an MIT study that hit on this point. It said that when you're voting with a ranked choice system, it takes an average of 12 seconds additionally on top of what you would otherwise spend voting per candidate, because you have to go through and
Wow.
you have to do the rankings, and that just takes more time, right?
Hmm.
It doesn't take into account having to research a lot of these folks, and particularly when you get to down ballot races, right? You may know the top 2 or 3 people running for Senate, for instance, or for governor,
Hmm.
but when you get down to those down ballot races, a lot of those folks are never people you've never heard of before, so you do have to do more research, and this is
Hmm.
one of the fundamentally flawed assumptions that the ranked choice voting community pushes, is this
Hmm.
idea that everybody wants to spend as much time on politics as I do, right? I for
That is
me
not correct.
right, for me election night is as good as the Super Bowl, but for most people
It
election
totally
night
is.
means that's the end of all of the ads. I can go
Thank
back to,
goodness.
yes, exactly.
Mailbox is empty. That's what
That's
most
how
people are.
most people view that.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not the way that the people pushing ranked choice voting think. So
Hmm.
it makes you, at bottom, it makes you take longer. It makes you spend more of your time on politics. It makes you take longer voting. That's going to lead to longer lines at polling places. All of
Hmm.
these, ripple effects that proceed from this one fundamentally flawed policy.
Yeah. And to be clear, I'm not advocating, Jason, that people shouldn't do their research. Absolutely should. But it is complicating, when folks perhaps are not as passionate about politics as you and I are, and are trying to do their research and then trying to rank. Maybe they have found that one candidate that they want to support, but now they're realizing that they have to rank, and that just adds in a whole nother level of complication. Let's go back to the bills that we are facing here in Maine. Again, LD 1666, that's the one that would apply ranked choice voting to our state elections, our state representative, state senator, et cetera, which is just a wordsmithing bill. What would you say to folks as they're hearing that ranked choice might be expanded? What would you say to Maine people that they should do? How can they take action to try to forestall this from becoming law in Maine?
Well, I would say, and I have to be a little careful wearing my C3 hat here,
Sure.
but I would say don't be shy with your opinions. That when people are talking about making changes like ranked choice voting, usually, of course, these folks are on the left. They'll say they're doing it in the name of democracy. And I say democracy is supposed to be about the government being accountable to the people, to the citizens. So they should not be shy about wanting to respect your constitution, respect the procedures that govern your elections. You have to agree that an election is legitimate. And if you are just ignoring the plain text of your constitution, I think that's going to raise all sorts of questions. So
Hmm.
even if you are somebody who supports ranked choice voting, you should want that change to be made the right way. And that means meeting that higher threshold that you need in order to amend the Constitution and persuading your fellow voters in Maine that they should embrace and support this. And that's the way to do it. So I think that there's ample room for people on both the pro RCV and the anti RCV side to come together and say, at a minimum, don't play these wordsmithing games with the Maine Constitution.
Yeah, so I will be really specific, Jason, and say this is before the legislature. That means that your state representative and your state senator are going to vote on it. And at some point, Governor Mills is going to have to weigh in. Now, she previously said that ranked choice voting in these state races was not constitutional. So it'll be interesting to see if this bill should pass and hit her desk. Hopefully it will not, but if it should pass and hit her desk, will she sign it? Will she allow it to become law without a signature? Will she veto it? I'm not holding my breath. I would love to say that we need to stop it before it gets there, but we do have a Democrat majority in Augusta who's been passing a lot of crazy things over the last number of years. And so I would advocate that Maine people do need to speak up. And of course, at our Lead Maine website, leadmaine.com, folks can find information on how to testify on legislation, whether that is through submitting testimony online or by testifying in person, which is always what I advocate for. And so if there are folks out there listening who want to speak up on this particular legislation, they can do so by visiting leadmaine.com and visiting our resources page. I think a constitutional amendment that passed ranked choice voting and put it in our Constitution would be just about impossible to undo in the future. So that is an absolute non-starter for me.
Yeah, that's the thing with constitutional amendments of this sort. I think that we always have to remember that it is difficult to amend the Constitution, and it's equally difficult to amend it to undo the damage that you
Mm-hmm.
do with a bad amendment. And one thing that we see all across the country is that the left is just willing to bring far more resources to the table than the right is, especially on issues like this. We're talking about massive spending disparities that sometimes can be 10 to 1. So if they're looking for this, there's sort of that stalking horse of ranked choice voting with the direct election of an AG and an SOS maybe as the sweetener. I think you're right to be pretty skeptical of that and to suspect that it would be far harder in the future to take it out. That's also why so much of the energy in 2024 was spent by the pro RCV lobby trying to lock ranked choice voting into all of those states' constitutions. They didn't want to risk just doing this as an experiment or as a pilot program like what they did in Utah, because that pilot program ultimately imploded. So they wanted to guarantee that this would be put into constitutions so it would be almost impossible to get it back out. And thankfully, all of those states ducked that. And I certainly hope that Maine pays attention to what those other states did. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
your own lived experience with the complexity of ranked choice voting.
For sure. And I'll be watching Alaska very carefully now that I know that there's another attempt to repeal it. I applaud that. The left is very diligent. They will repeatedly try the same effort over and over and over again until they win. I think you're right. Even if they peel back and say, okay, we're going to like give ranked choice a break for a minute, I don't think that break is going to last that long. And they'll be back to try again and again and again. I'm glad to see that persistence in working to roll it back. We don't always see that, I think, on our side of the aisle or on my side of the aisle. And so I hope Maine is paying attention and watching, because if Alaska were to be successful in rolling back ranked choice voting, then there's one state, one state left at that point with ranked choice. And I think you can make a pretty strong argument that we should probably roll it back too.
Well, I don't think that it has any place in any election in the United States. I think it's fundamentally opposed to very basic conceptions of what the democratic process is supposed to look like. You know, we've talked about one person, one vote. I think that it is akin to a used car salesman trying to sell you a lemon. All of the different ways that ranked choice voting can go sideways, can lead to undemocratic results, can lead to people that get more votes losing election, and on and on. It adds complexity, it adds expense. I've been very glad to see so much quite frankly, so much winning on our side on this issue over the last couple of years. We defeated all of those ballot measures. In December of this past year, we helped to defeat an attempt to put ranked choice voting on the ballot in Michigan in 2026. An effort folded. They didn't gather enough signatures. They weren't able to convince even a few 100,000 people in Michigan that this was something that they needed. But you're right that the left is always coming back to the same bad ideas over and over and over again. And what they really need is for us on the right to just take our eye off the ball so they can land a victory once. We have to stay engaged and keep beating it back every time. In fact, just yesterday, I got a call that in Ohio there are 2 cities that are going to put ranked choice voting on the ballot this November. So ranked choice voting is continuing. It's just at a much lower level. I think they're dialing it back, and they're just trying to continue with the local strategy to keep ranked choice voting, expanding at the local level, continue to normalize it. And then in a few years, if we aren't paying attention and if we don't continue the effort to ban ranked choice voting, which we've helped lead the charge, and we've got 17 states to ban ranked choice voting so far already in the last 3 years, then we're going to one day wake up to another $100 million multi-state blitz where the left is trying to fundamentally rig the rules with ranked choice voting in a lot of key states.
Well, listen, you tell those Ohio ranked choice vote opponents to come interview some Mainers. They'll get a really strong opinion about ranked choice voting that I'm sure will convince Ohioans not to vote for it.
Well, I'm an Ohioan born and raised, so I think I'll be back in my home state helping to educate them, and perhaps we can get you to come out and talk to some folks about the problems that you've experienced in Maine with ranked choice voting.
Happily. Well, thank you so much, Jason. Where can folks find you, find more out about Honest Elections Project, and anything else that you want to say about ranked choice voting, or these pieces of legislation that we're seeing before us here in Maine to wrap this up?
Well, I encourage everyone who's watching or listening to this to check out honestyelections.org. That's our website. You can find all of the information about the major priorities that we are focused on when it comes to election integrity. Defeating ranked choice voting is one of our top issues. You can also download our brand new report, Safeguarding Elections, which details 14 major agenda items that every state needs to adopt to deliver free and fair elections. And banning ranked choice voting is part of that list. It is, as I said, it's been a signature issue of ours. But we're also working to get foreign influence out of our politics and stop organizations, particularly on the left, from laundering foreign money into the ballot measure process and influencing state constitutions. So we've been very active on that issue. And then a whole host of others, making sure that we've got proof of citizenship requirements, voter ID requirements, on and on. So we're active at the state level, and you can check out the latest there at honestylections.org, or you can follow us on Twitter. I always struggle calling it X, so I'll just continue to call it Twitter. At Jason W.
X,
Snead
formerly
for me.
known as Twitter.
Exactly, and at Honest Elections for the organization.
Well, thank you so much, Jason. Thank you for tuning in to Speak Up with Laurel Libby. Please subscribe at YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, wherever you consume your podcasts, and we'll talk to you again next time. Since we originally recorded this podcast, there have been significant developments that we should be sure to include. In short, the House and the Senate passed LD 1666. To be clear, it was voted for mostly on party lines. Democrats in Augusta supported ranked choice vote expansion to legislative and gubernatorial races, while Republicans largely voted against. This happened very quickly, as things can in the legislature. Democrats watched for an opportunity to make sure that they had the number of votes that they needed and then slammed it through. What's unique here, though, with LD 1666, of course, is the fact that the Supreme Court previously said this is unconstitutional. You cannot do this. And so following the legislature voting in support of LD 1666, they then called for what's called a solemn occasion and asked for the Supreme Court to weigh in once again on whether this is constitutional or not. What has changed since 2017 when the Supreme Court first weighed in? Of course, the court has. You have different appointees to the court than we had in 2017. Only one member of the court that was on it then remains now. So now LD 1666, an expansion of the ranked choice vote in Maine, is really in the hands of both the Supreme Court and Governor Mills, as it will head to her desk at some point pending the conversation in the Supreme Court. We will keep folks posted. Thanks so much for tuning in to Speak Up with Laurel Libby.